So if you read Philip Martin, our local critic here, his review this morning, he said this is likely one of the best films that you're going to see this year. And I think that that's definitely true. And I would say as far as documentaries go, it's probably the best one that we've had in the 5 years that we've been running this film festival. And one of the things that I think that we've really learned as our staff have got to screen so many documentaries, pretty much we see everything on the festival circuit every year, is it's not that hard to make a decent documentary, but it's nearly impossible to make a great documentary because there's so many factors involved. It's not just the story, it's not just the character, there's also the unpredictability of events. And then you have to have the courage, in this case, to stick with a story for 5 years, not knowing if HBO is going to ever buy your film in the end. So tell me about that process. Why did you stick with it, and when did you know you had something special?
First of all, I just want to say what a huge honor it is to sit next to Brent Renaud. I'm a huge fan of his films and his brother's films, so it's just incredible to be here. So thank you, Brett. Yeah, it was a labor of love for 5 years, and I think we knew right from the offset that there was going to be a story here of sorts, but whether that would be a tabloid, sensationalist documentary about, you know, this freaky boy running these long distances or anything more, we weren't quite sure. What really struck me at the beginning was Budia, who had an extraordinary talent, and this really complex relationship that he had with his coach. That really struck me. I wanted to find out more about why Budia runs these distances for him and what would be the consequences of stopping. I remember the first time that I came across Budia and Baranci, it was in a web article of the BBC, and there was a photograph of Baranci there, and he just seemed to occupy this potent dual role in Budia's life from the offset of being both a foster father and a coach. And we've seen examples of this elsewhere. Certainly in the States you have examples with tennis players and golfing players. So that was what really struck me. And, you know, it may sound implausible, but I didn't really fully know who the subject of my film was until about halfway through filming. You know, was it Budia? And what was troubling me was the fact that there was a boy at the heart of the story who essentially doesn't have a voice of his own for much of the film. And so is it plausible to make a film about this child? But then I realized that the film is as much about Baranci as it is about Budia. You know, Budia is the vehicle into the story, while Baranci is the main driving force behind it. And I think once I understood that, then things began to fall into place. And so Marathon Boy became the story of a poor man and a slum boy who are united by a dream, but divided by the world. But what adds to this richness is that the dream is inherently flawed and problematic. And Baranci Das, he's not a hero figure. He's this deeply flawed lead character. He's what I call an anti-hero, you know, flawed but largely loved. And then the film became about how other people and darker forces gradually begin to infect their shared dream and tear them apart. So I think once I'd understood that it was about the two of them together and about everybody else feeding into their dream, infecting their dream, then it kind of made sense for me. But certainly, you know, the various twists and turns and complexities of the story over that long period were impossible to have predicted from the outset. And
did you always believe in Baranci, or was there ever a point where you felt like you maybe even needed to step in for the welfare of the kid?
I never 100% believed in Baranci, and you know, it's a fairly objective film. You don't really get a sense of how I feel in the film, but I was deeply conflicted towards Baranci. And there were a lot of heated conversations going on behind the scenes. You know, I mean, he knew that I didn't approve of a boy being able to run these long distances. They were outlandish distances that he was running at times, and I made sure he was aware of international guidelines of child running. So I think that actually enabled us to maintain trust over that period of time. I wasn't trying to toe his line, whereas a lot of the local Indian media was specifically doing that, and then they suddenly turned on him and he didn't get it. I was from the outside, and he knew exactly how I felt, and yeah, we were able to maintain trust because of that.
Trust and access is something that's, you know, really sticks out to me in this film, because not only do you have access to Baranci and the kid, but his mother, and even when they are fighting, you maintain access on both sides. The police, the officials. How did you negotiate all that?
Pretty much by being honest, I think, with all individuals involved. So everybody knew who I was filming with, the types of conversations I was having, and we'd never side with one individual against another, you know. And I think usually there's that balance that you're trying to strike with contributors, that's something less than friendship, but more than that professional shirt and tie relationship. But in this case, that all went out the window, and I became deeply involved in all their lives. And as I said, we'd have these intense debates over what was happening. With Sukanti as well, actually. I mean, she knew that I didn't think Branchi had stashed away these enormous piles of money. There was absolutely no evidence for that. But, you know, every individual made up their own mind. And I think also I didn't have a direct impact on their fate. I mean, you see in the film how powerful the media is in India in shaping their fate. They knew that I couldn't actually do anything to better their circumstances, change their circumstances. Whether I was filming there or not, Budya would still have been running, actually. It wouldn't have made any difference. So that powerlessness, from my point of view, certainly helped me, I think. And also, I don't think they felt that there was going to be a film made at the end of this. They were used to me just coming year after year, filming with them. But they're so used to fast turnaround news interviews that they can see the results of within, 24 hours. They tend to think, here's this, lovely girl from England coming out, filming with us again. Will she ever make the film? I didn't know what the end of the film would be myself. At times I was thinking, as you rightly point out, is this just stupidity because I'm wasting a lot of money potentially, and time and effort, and maybe there isn't going to be a film. What is the end point of it? So.
Can you talk about the process? 5 years. How did you go about that? Did you move to India? Did you have crews working there? How did you manage to make this?
We were based in the UK, and we just pretty much take any job in between that paid. This is myself and the producer, Matt Norman, who's also the DOP of the film. So he works as a cameraman in his own right. He makes films. He worked on Planet Earth and the David Attenborough films. So he'd go off and spend 5 months in the Amazon or something just to get a pot of money. I'd take any job that I could as a freelance director with Discovery or the BBC. And then we go back out there from anything from 10 days to about 3 months each year. And we do about 3 trips out there. So, and often we'd have kind of a hint about something was going to happen. Branchi would call me and say, hey, I've got this great idea for a, Budya's next feat. It's going to be a walk, a 500-kilometer walk, which just sounded bonkers, completely and utterly bonkers. The child's been forbidden from running, so what's he going to do? He's going to make him walk. It just sounded mad. But from Branchi's point of view, he wanted to score a political victory over the government. He wanted to earn some publicity for Budya, and he wanted to attract sponsorship for the judo hall, because a year after the running ban, he was gradually running out of options and money to support everybody. And so it fell on Budya to showcase his talent once again. So in Branchi's world, it made complete sense. But for me, it made no sense at all. But I would go out there and just see how it all unfolded, really. And I think ultimately, because we were filming observationally and just allowing the story to unfold without prejudicing it in any way or interfering in it, that enabled me to have that flexibility in the edit. And then the challenge became, how to deliver an objective picture of what is a very complex situation. So,
I think, we've all seen Slumdog Millionaire, so we think we understand about poverty in India and what that's all about. But the mother comes across a little bit as possibly a villain in this film. I know that's probably not your intention, but I think she does that on her own. What can you tell us about the life that they live and help us understand her reaction and the way that she behaved a little better?
Right, yeah, I was quite surprised by the mum's volte-face. She becomes ultimately this quite powerful figure who's able of standing up in front of press and police and talking out against Branchi Das, but she comes from nothing. She's living on the edge of survival. It's a very opportunistic world where everybody just wants to live, to survive, basically. You see with the murderer, he says, I was promised a house. He murdered for a house. Similarly with Sukanti, behind the scenes, she's been promised by the government a house, 4 walls. It's something that she doesn't have. So, at that level of society where you have absolutely nothing, you will take pretty much every opportunity you're given to better your lot. And if you look at kind of children's rights in India, because that's very much what the film's about. It's about poverty and children's rights. India ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Children in December 1992. So, you know, to all extent and purposes, it espoused the ideals held up by the international community. But we know that by some estimates, 50 million of India's 300 million children are denied their rights to safe drinking water, health, education, nutrition, basic survival. UNICEF report that 63% of India's children go to bed hungry, 53% suffer from chronic malnutrition. I mean, that's staggering figures for me. At the time of filming, the UN ranked India as having the highest infant mortality rate in the world. A child here dies every 15 seconds. So that's the backdrop to my film, and, you know, Budia's story of resilience and survival against the odds. So we can't appropriate our rights and freedoms to this story at all. You know, you have to look at it in the context of what are Budia's stark choices in life. You know, if he wasn't running, what are his options? And I hope that the film kind of presents those to you, really. There are no easy options for this boy and for any of the other children there.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and open up to the audience for questions. And are we using this mic? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Somebody have a question?
I have a question about when you decided that you had a film, because it seemed like there were several points in the story that you could have stopped and shown and had a very good documentary. So how did you decide to start the editing and put together a film?
Right. You know, the initial intention was to follow Budia over a much longer time frame, actually, right up until he becomes an adult. One of our favorite films is Hoop Dreams. I don't know if you know this, Steve James' film. Yeah, so we were going to follow Budia just to see whether he would become India's greatest runner. You know, would he fulfill all this potential that his coach and India's masses believed? But then halfway through filming, this much darker, more complex story starts to emerge, and what begins in hope and as this sporting epic suddenly crosses the line into top-level greed, envy, and corruption. And that really hooked me, actually, this kind of ever-darkening, tortuous narrative that suddenly started to grow from this film. And then definitely, once we'd kind of understood this, where was the end point? And I think it kind of came with Baranchi's murder, actually. I think that kind of neatly packaged it, and we thought, okay, you know, actually we thought to begin with, our film's over now, it's finished, we don't have a film, he's died, one of our lead characters has died, you know, how do we end it? And we didn't want to end it on tragedy, we had to find some kind of redemption from tragedy, and I think that comes when Budia goes to school. You know, he's given education as a chance to find a way out for himself. So, yeah, it was really with Baranchi's murder and then that scene at the school, we knew that we could find an end point from that. And then it became just how do we structure it? And I think one of the most important things for me was just to handle the moral debate in the most rigorous and sophisticated way we could, really. We didn't want to give any easy answers in the film. We just wanted to present a story without fixed notions of good and evil, actually, and just leave it for you, the viewers, to make up your own mind about who the heroes are and who the villains are, really. So,
when you think about where he is now and how this film ended, do you feel okay, like things have worked out for him, or do you feel like there's great potential loss? And I understand, maybe my brother just texted me actually and told me in an interview that you did with him for the web, you had said something about no more media is allowed to cover him.
Right.
You're not able to update the story.
Right. Which is just fantastic, actually, that he's not allowed to have any cameras in. I mean, we're allowed to go in and see him. I think we were just so touched by Budia's story that we regularly go out to see him and send him packages whenever he needs things. But, you know, this is India. There are no happy endings for anyone. You know, it's a very melancholy, bittersweet tone to the film. And that seemed appropriate for Budia's story. You know, we're hoping now that he goes to this terrific school that he's going to have great opportunities. He's mixing with the highest echelons, actually, of Orissa society, and he's learning English. So we just hope that he'll stick at it and not be dragged back into the slums, which is always a danger because his mum is she's essentially owned now by these two slumlords, and I think one of them is now her boyfriend. You know, she needs a place to stay. She can't afford her own house. So they provide that for her in exchange for certain services. So we just hope that, you know, they allow Buria just to be a child, have an education, and don't suddenly decide at the age of 11 or 12, okay, you're going to start running again now, okay? You're going to, because they see him as a little bit of a cash cow, I think. And he's part owned by the government. The government is still thinking this kid's going to bring back laurels to our state one day. They still expect him to do that. So, you know, it's never going to be easier for Budia. But, you know, he's been performing his own kind of kid magic for so long now. He's just surviving all these adults fighting to control him. So hopefully he'll be okay. And we have a trust fund that we've set up just to help him on his way. And, you know, I feel very protective over him. And, you know, I'd love, the ideal scenario would be if at 17, he's passed his exams in India and he gives me a call and wants to come over to England and pursue a further education, and I'll just, you know, we'll help him out like a flash. But yeah. Yeah, but he's a kid that haunts you for sure, you know.
You said earlier that you came across the story on the BBC, but I was wondering what how the story actually came to you to begin with, and then how you as an artist decided, okay, this is the story that I'm going to devote my time to, and how that came to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain websites that I just browse. The New York Times is one, NPR is another one, BBC is always one every day, their homepage. And they have these strange but true stories, and it was just one saying, kid in India runs a marathon a day, which just sounded absurd, you know, and because I run marathons, I guess, that kind of hooked me in. And also, you know, my background, my birth mother was from a similar situation to Sukanti, actually. She's from a slum area in India, very poor, and she gave me up because I was female. I came out a girl, and, you know, the importance of having a son in India just put enormous pressure on her, I think. And then fate led me to be adopted by an English couple, and I led this entirely different life. So, but also my adoptive father, he reminded me of Buranchi in many ways, because he took in my adoptive father, this kind of ragtag bunch of kids from different Hindu, Sikh, Muslim backgrounds. So there's 9 adopted kids in my family, and he gave them all this life worth living. So I saw similarities with Buranchi in that way. So initially I kind of thought of Buranchi as this saint, actually. So yeah, there were striking similarities. So that was kind of drawing me into the story. And the first time I went out, I spent a lot of time with Sukanti in the slum. I spent about 3 weeks just living with her in the slum area, you know, and just living her life and defecating by the roadside and all the rest of it, and just trying to understand her life and the choices she's made, really, just to be able to do her justice in the film. And then, you know, as we started to film more, the story presented itself more and more like a fiction narrative. I mean, it plays out like drama to me. So I was thinking of the film as much in terms of as drama as documentary, actually. I wanted to give it a narrative spin, a little bit like a genre film. It suddenly turns into this film noir, or it has these thriller qualities halfway through. Yeah, so Slumdog Millionaire, you know, Rocky, Karate Kid, all these kind of reference points were coming to mind. It presents this goal-driven underdog faced with constant obstacles, this touching, albeit troubling, mentor-mentee relationship. You have these extraordinary plot twists, a hero's journey of epic proportions, and then ultimately that triumph from tragedy. It's a story with much-needed redemption at the end for the small boy. So yeah, that kind of paved the way, really, just to start thinking about how to structure the film and not worry so much about what we had in our 300 hours of footage, but just kind of paper edit it like a narrative film, and then work out where the gaps were in our footage, and did we need to go back out and shoot in order to fill in those gaps. So yeah, we wanted to hit specific story beats, emotional beats that way.
You mentioned earlier that we need to realize that India is much different than other parts of the world like America, so it's, we kind of need to look at it from their point of view. One thing that I noticed in film, it seemed like the public seemed to always be behind Baranchi, and they wanted the kid to run. They just cheered him on. They didn't see anything wrong with it. Whereas here in America, if we saw somebody doing this, it wouldn't happen. There was just no way. So I guess my question is, did the public in general, just everybody, support them, or was there also this large outcry that we didn't necessarily see in the film saying, no, you can't do this to a kid?
Right, that's a great question. Yeah, you're right, it wouldn't happen here. I think, the question for me in this film was never, should Budia be allowed to run? Of course he shouldn't. He shouldn't be running these outlandish distances. I don't think anybody in the West would say it's a good thing. The more interesting question for me was, how is it possible for Budia to exist as a running phenomenon in the first place? What conditions, social, political, cultural, enable that to happen? So that was my starting point of interest. And sorry, what was the next part of your question?
He was asking about the public. Was everyone for him?
Right. No, halfway through the film you have that debate in Delhi, in the capital, and that's where you see that modern India is completely divided. You have old India meets new India at that point, if you like. So, on the one hand, you have modern India trying to position itself among the developed world, this democratic force to be reckoned with, yet struggling to come to grips with the realities of the slums, crippling poverty, organized crime, police corruption. Yet for the rural masses, the poor, they see Budia and Baranchi as heroes, as freedom fighters, if you like, offering hope, because this one man's Olympic ambition has lifted a single anonymous product of rural oppression onto a national stage, and they look to that and think, I want my kid to be like that too. It speaks to the cult of celebrity as much in India as anywhere else. They all want their child to have that moment of celebrity, to be somebody, and they genuinely thought, this is going to better our lot. If my child can get to that stage, he's going to bring back glory to me. There's potential riches to be had. So those that had nothing at all looked at Baranchi as some kind of hero. And yeah, they stuck to him. But India, modern India, Delhi, the big cities, totally didn't approve of it, actually. So.
One question I had, kind of in the back of my mind when I watch a lot of documentaries, is when you were filming, especially early on, did you find the subjects, mainly the major subjects, but also the minor subjects that you interviewed, how open were people to being filmed and being on camera? Did you have to build a relationship first, or was everybody pretty easy about being a part of the film?
I think before I started to film, I just spent a lot of time on the ground, so people just got used to seeing me there and knowing me, and hospitality is very important in India, so if anyone invited me to an event or to their house, I would always go. So I very quickly, because Bhubanesh was a small society, became known to everybody. So when it came to picking up a camera and shooting, people were just used to my presence being there. And another thing, and I don't know if you've ever filmed this way, because it's a film that needed a translator, very often, because it's observational, my translator wouldn't translate to me every single line. We didn't have this interventionist approach where he'd be telling me what's happening, then I'd ask another question. So we just let scenes unfold. And that way people would just forget you're there after a certain amount of time, and they'd continue having discussions between them while openly knowing that you're filming them, so there's nothing covert about it. But it would just become a much more natural process. So that helped tremendously, yeah.
It seems like you had support in Britain for this film before you got your support from HBO. How did that happen?
Yeah, we'd finished our 5 years of filming, so we had all these tapes just stuck in the loft in boxes, and we couldn't afford to translate them. So actually the first people to come on board were the Tribeca Film Institute in New York. They gave us money to translate our tapes, which was just wonderful, actually. And then from that, we were able to cut a trailer, and then we showed it to the BBC at that point. But because it's my first feature documentary, I did a pretty detailed paper edit, actually, to show them as well. So it was about 12 pages of exactly how I saw the film playing out. And it didn't actually change from that, the film. So the BBC, a guy called Nick Fraser, BBC Storyville, he just loved it from day one. And the trailer, it was very detailed. It was more of a work in progress. So it had this 3-act structure, and you could see exactly how the story was going to play out. So, and once BBC Storyville come on board, then, you know, there's a saying that once Nick Fraser's on board, that everybody tends to follow like sheep. So we managed to get France on board, Arte, and some other European players, which was just brilliant. And then we had the courage to take it to HBO. I was speaking to a lot of distributors, actually, just to see what they thought of the film, and they were all saying, you should take it to HBO, they'd love it. But I don't think I had the courage for a long time to try that, actually. And I knew we'd only get one shot, so I wanted to go in with as many guns blazing as possible. And yeah, so they just came on board. Sheila Nevins loved it straight away and backed it. And it was great because as soon as HBO came on board, then the parameters just changed. You know, it became, you know, an edit for as long as I needed. They'd call me out to New York. You got tremendous mentoring with them as well. And they were never prescriptive about how your film should be. They just point out, well, I don't quite understand this bit here or this bit, and you know, you go back away and just make more sense of it. So it was just a wonderful process with them, actually, and they became our majority funders. And yeah, without HBO, this film definitely wouldn't exist, actually. So.
Are you doing a theatrical release for this?
We are in other countries, but not the US. HBO are essentially our distributors, so the film is going to be shown on HBO Documentary Films on November the 3rd. And then I think we can do a theatrical sometime after that, but yeah, we're in discussions at the moment about that, so yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I don't think I need a microphone. The shadow puppets that were scattered throughout the film, the documentary, whose idea was that? And I think they were an excellent bridge to the various parts of the film.
Thank you. That was my idea, and I think because the story had a small boy at the center, I wanted to create something that felt like a dark fairy tale, just embed the story within this mythic realm, and give it an air of like a Grimm's kind of fairy tale, really. So we used stop motion to make the animations. And, you know, with all these things, it's hugely experimental, and it really relied on HBO liking it and backing it. And fortunately, yeah, Sheila and Lisa, whom I think you know as well, just loved it from day one. So they allowed me just to explore that idea. Yeah, and originally we wanted to do it with traditional Indian shadow puppetry. Orissa State has this long and proud tradition of shadow puppetry. It's very much part of their cultural fabric, but we realized quite soon that it didn't have the flexibility to do what we wanted, so we had to revert to computerized. But we wanted to give it that lo-fi, kind of gritty, grainy look. And I also borrowed from a terrific artist called Lottie Reiniger. I don't know if you know her. She pioneered this distinctive style of black and white silhouette animation back in the 1930s in her interpretation of classic children's myths. And they're both disturbing and enchanting. So I borrowed heavily from her, actually. So it's a hybrid of traditional Indian shadow puppetry and Lottie Reiniger's work, actually, just to embed it within that dark fairy tale or rags to riches morality tale. So.
Have you shown the film in India? What was the reaction?
We haven't shown the film in India, actually. We're still debating whether that's a good thing to do. Yeah, I think the main cause of concern for HBO is if anybody on the ground doesn't approve of it that's in the film, or the way that we represent the murder or slum mafia. But I think it's quite ambiguous, actually. We don't really point the finger at anyone in the film. It's all just kind of hinted at. So, I mean, I'd love to show it to an Indian audience, actually, but that's something we're still in discussions with, whether we feel it's appropriate to do so.
Do you have any theories on what actually happened and how high up in the government an order might have even come to kill him?
Yeah, I mean, it was just devastating. You know, I mean, I can understand people wanting to punish Branchi Das. even send him to jail, ensuring that he's separated from Budia, but to murder him in such a brutal manner at point blank range, there was just something really sinister about the whole thing. And there were lots of stories that did the rounds, and many suggestions were made, some involving Budia, some involving these shady deals. And it's only after Baranchi's death that I learned a lot more about him. You know, I came to realize that he was this kind of subterranean mayor of Orissa, and he was involved in a lot of shady deals, purely to keep the judo hall up and running, actually. You know, he was a poor man. His income was so meager. He owned a carpentry shop, 2 roadside eateries, a barber's shop, but it was a pittance, actually. And those kids were the love of his life. He would do anything for them. So he's something of this kind of Fagin character from Oliver Twist. You know, he takes in this bunch of kids, teaches them to pickpocket, petty crimes, in exchange for a roof over their heads. So he was involved in all these scrap deals and stuff. So I think somewhere along the lines, he was linked to slum mafia, you know, and maybe he rubbed them up the wrong way in some respect. I'm not quite sure. There was this lovely theory, actually, nothing to do with it, and I wanted to include it in the film, but I ultimately thought that it would be too confusing for the viewer to introduce so many new characters at the end. And it's this theory that it was the Good Samaritan in Baranchi Das that persuaded him to intervene in this one-sided love affair of his assassin for this beautiful local starlet. Raja, his assassin, was chasing this girl. He was sending her death threats, actually, because she refused to marry him. And this girl came to Baranchi, as did many damsels in distress, to seek protection from him. And it's believed that Baranchi asked Raja not to chase this girl and just allow her freedom and privacy. But Raja disliked Baranchi coming between them and wanted to finish him off. So, you know, did Baranchi die for an honorable cause, you know, helping another, as he has done so many times before? And I really like that, actually, because so many times when I was filming, you know, there would be these huge queues of people outside the judo hall, literally hundreds sometimes, queuing up to solicit his help in, you know, debts that they had, all kinds of things. And he'd never turn anyone away. He'd always help. He'd somehow find the money. So I think he was linked to this underworld, which ultimately caught up with him and caused him problems.
One more question over here.
I'd like to know what inspired you to direct in the first place, if it's an ongoing daily thing that you're inspired, or was there a moment?
I think it was just that initial curiosity over this boy, and because I had those kind of personal links to wanting really badly, actually, to go and find a film in India. You know, I very quickly was drawn to Budia and touched by his story. But part of it was just stupidity. You know, you have no idea where the story's going, but there's just something that is drawing you to it. It's just your curiosity. And it's blind faith sometimes, isn't it? You just hope that something's going to come from it in the end. But it was the characters and Baranchi and Budia, their complex relationship. And actually just not understanding sometimes where the story was going. Baranchi would often say to me, there are people out to take me out, you know. I mean, he would say these things to me and it wouldn't make any sense at the time. I wasn't fully understanding these darker subtexts to the story, but little things would just keep you coming back to try and make sense of it, I guess. But it wasn't really until the edit that I was completely able to stand back and look at it and just fully understand the interconnection of all the story elements, I think.
How did you make your first contact with Baranchi, your first contact? Do you remember when the first time you spoke to him? Was it by phone? Was it by email? Did you just show up? How did that happen?
Right. It was through my dad, my adoptive father, who's Sikh, and he speaks about 5 different Indian languages. So I took him the article, actually, and said, look, I want to be able to find this person. You know, you can't Google it. They don't have a website or anything. So my father just helped me. We did look on a website, and we saw Orissa had a state museum with a telephone number. So we called the state museum and said, do you know this man? And they didn't know this man. They said, but I know somebody who might. And so it was just this chain, actually. We spoke to another person who said, actually, I know his uncle. We phoned his uncle. His uncle said, yes, I'll put you in touch. you need to call back at this particular time, and he'll be standing by this particular phone on the roadside. And that's how we did it, really. So it took about, well, it's just a few hours to kind of trace him, really. And my dad spoke to him and just explained exactly, you know, the nature of what I wanted to do, just the curiosity, and the possibility of making a documentary. And, you know, he loves media attention, Branchi. So he just said, sure, come out and spend some time with us. And actually, as soon as I hit the ground, he just got inundated with calls from American production companies, Australian production companies, UK production companies, because people were just hearing about this boy, and it was just one of those freaky stories. But I just happened to luckily be on the ground and starting to make that contact. And he said, well, you've made the effort to come out here, and I like you, and I trust you. And that's all Branchi would ever say, is actually, I like you, and I trust you. I'd ask him, do you want to see some footage? You know, do you want to know how I see this story, or do you want to see how I see it playing out? He says, no, I like you, and I trust you. And that's enough, actually. And once Branchi decided that he likes someone, then that's it. You know, he will, you know, he'll open up all doors for you and do pretty much anything for you. So, yeah, I think I just felt lucky getting out there before anyone else.
Anybody else? So Gemma, thank you so much for coming to Little Rock and bringing this film here. You know, we've been a fan of this since the first time that we saw it, and we weren't able to get you down here when you won the grand prize at our film festival. But we're really happy that you made the time to come back now, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Brent. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
I wonder what these people